Hello, everyone. A brief note on today's episode. Our guest in this conversation, Dennis Althar, and I had a particularly long conversation, the longest to date, actually, and this is the full version of that conversation. If you would prefer a condensed accounting of Dennis's truly incredible story and musings, you can refer to the edited version of this episode instead. But with that, please enjoy my conversation with Dennis Althar.
Anything that affects our senses, because we seek out things. They always talk about this business thing. If I hear one more time, they say, what's the pain point? Do they miss all the pleasure point? You don't get comfortable seats because of pain. You get comfort. You'll seek comfort. You'll seek good things. You'll run away from pain. So do you want to only sell because of the pain point, or do you want to have things where it's a pleasure point and people feel good about what you got? People love music. Why would they sell all those CDs or streaming or all this? Because we're wired for sound.
Let's discover the Cleveland entrepreneurial ecosystem. We are telling the stories of its entrepreneurs and those supporting them.
Welcome to the Lay of the Land podcast, where we are exploring what people are building in Cleveland. I am your host, Jeffrey Stern, and today I had the real pleasure of speaking with Dennis Althar. This conversation is our longest to date, and only more wisdom is unlocked the deeper into the throes of Dennis's mind we go. Today, Dennis founded and runs Althar Audio here in Slavic Village within Cleveland, where he sells premier audio systems. But as you'll hear, Dennis not only has a deep passion for unlocking the highest levels of audible literacy, but there's a real commitment to the craft itself and questioning across the board why we've always done things the way we've done things, and really digging into and solutioning where the justification for the way things are today is that this has always been the way that we have done it. This curiosity Dennis carries with him has exposed him to a breadth of experiences, from a prodigal expertise in electronics to the United States Air Force, to medical technology, to audio systems. And in this conversation, we really cover everything from Dennis's early life to hard electronics to entrepreneurship to philosophy itself. This really was a special conversation, and I hope you all enjoy it. Welcome, Dennis. It is a real pleasure to have you on. Once again, I'll bring up Bob Sopko, who back through the archives here was actually one of the first guests we've had on the podcast, and is kind of an ultimate maven here in Cleveland, making connections for the show and bringing folks together. And I'll actually let Bob set the stage here a little bit, because the way he introduced me to you was really kind of extraordinary. But he introduced you as his friend, as someone who's used your own inventiveness to help bring yourself to a productive life, as someone who read every book on electronics in the library by the time you were 7, as a community builder, as a veteran, as an entrepreneur, as a colleague of Steve Wozniak since the 70s. And now you're building and manufacturing here in Cleveland incredible sound systems. And so there's just a lot to unpack and uncover here. And so I'd love to dive into this, leaving the floor kind of open to you to take us through your journey and your past as we work our way towards some of the more specific things. But I'd love to just hear a little bit about yourself.
Well, I would first off say that I'm not a colleague of Steve Wozniak's, but I've known him. So he'll return my emails generally. So it's not like we work together, but that's another story. So where should we start on this journey here?
Yeah, I think I'd love to start maybe even as far back as your interest in electronics, as kind of the common theme that ties, as I have seen it, a lot of your work
Technology.
together maybe stems from that. Yeah,
it's all about technology. I would consider myself an uber geek. I live for electronics and mechanics and anything that's creative and you could make the world a better place. So as you'd said, I started reading books on electronics when I was a kid, mainly because I was in the projects, and after I was out of the projects, I had like 3 half brothers and, stepfathers that weren't the best people. And one of them always had that where you were to be seen but never heard. So I made as much time as I could away from the house. And I spent a lot of time in the library reading about a lot of sci-fi, love sci-fi, read everything on electronics. I remember reading about how TVs work and go, this is simple. This is so logical. And then I read all the stuff on the children's side, and then I snuck over to the adult side and read all that stuff and really started repairing, stereos and TVs and stuff at an early age. I'd repair anything for $1 in parts. So, and I got really good at troubleshooting, quite good and understanding how, but I couldn't just repair anything. I always had to modify it. It was like if you had a 5-tube radio and it would take time to warm up and come on, I would put what's called a diode across the power switch that would be the opposite of the power supply, that it would keep the tubes warm, but it wouldn't give them power. And then when you threw the switch, it would short by the diode, and instant on television, instant on radios, and no one had that back then. So I was always tinkering, always adding more parts or taking parts out, and got quite good at it. So early part of my life, I bought all my own test equipment and had my first job when I was probably around 9 or 10, working in a hardware store, learning how to put together bikes and all that kind of good stuff. And then as I went through life, due to I was really great at electronics. I really knew it. I was in summer, I went to Ball and Wallace College and part of a program called Upward Bound. And I kind of snuck away from home after, in 9th grade, I started staying with friends and couch surfing, and, the home situation stunk so bad. But I did graduate from high school. I was on my own pretty much. I was actually emancipated, they call it, legally. And I always had multiple jobs. I'd work. I could go without sleeping, maybe sleeping 3-4 hours a night. So I was really productive, always building stuff, and I had a passion for sound and passion for pictures and electronics and cars. I could work. I owned a ton of cars. When I was 8 years old, I was already buying and selling cars. So, you could own a car at any age. You couldn't drive it. So at one time I had 5 cars across the street from where we lived here in Slavic Village. I don't know who owned the property. It was an empty lot, and I had 5 cars over there, and I'd swap cars, and it was crazy. It was crazy. So
no Hot Wheels, real cars.
No real cars. But all of them were real junk. I mean, you're talking about these things had may pop tires. They may pop at any moment. They were pretty sore cars. They were ready. They were past ready for being for the scrapyard, but they ran. My one brother passed away by sleeping in his car and the fumes got to him. And at that point I was around 17, and I go, I really am good at electronics. I'm really good at electronics, but who's going to believe you? Well, you taught yourself. Well, what school did you go to? This, that, and the other. And actually I'd had an opportunity to go to Exeter. And my mother at that time was a little narcissistic. People are what they are. And it meant she would go off welfare sooner. So that wasn't going to happen. Before then, I had a chance to skip 3 grades when I was in elementary school. Same story. So when that happened, I figured, this is time to get out of here. That's when I kind of went on my own. And to back up a little bit. And then when my brother passed away, I figured, well, maybe if I joined the Air Force, and I told people, well, I had, where do you know electronics? Well, I was in the Air Force. Then that would validate that I actually knew electronics, because most people say, well, if you're in the military, did electronics, that's even better than going to college for a trade school. So I joined the Air Force. I went to their electronics school in Keesler, after basic, of course. And I had a 2.5-year course. I think I did it in about 8 weeks. I had the highest scores they ever had. Just took a test every day. That's all they'd let you do, is 1 test a day, or I would have been out of there a lot sooner. So in about 8 weeks, I took all the tests, ended up going to the Southeast Asia, to the Philippines, and working on things like commando escort and presidential communications and sensor program and things called TOF and all this microwave stuff and everything, basically, in this, Philippines, Thailand. So had a great career. I was did work with a 3-star general and didn't have any rank. I remember he used to say, looks at me one day and he goes, well, what did you do to get busted? I go, I never got any stripes, because by the time you'd be over in the Philippines on any career, you usually had a stripe or two. I didn't have any. I said, I would love to have you. You can give me one if you'd like. I made airmen in the, ear and airmen in the base and all that kind of stuff. So I was pretty involved in things. And that was right in around 72. And then at the end of that, I got transferred to the States to go to Panama City, Florida. And that's right when Vietnam ended. And they said, well, if you want to get rid of 40,000 people and your job, what you're doing right now, no longer exists because it's in direct support of what some of the stuff we're doing in Nam. Would you like an early out with full benefits? And I go, well, let me look that up and think about that. So I'll have medical and college and GI Bill for buying a house. And my purpose is to go in and have people believe that I know something about electronics. Yeah, I think I'll take that deal. So the next day I was out of the Air Force. It was unbelievable. So when I got out of the Air Force, I, immediately started looking for a job. I never got on unemployment. I came back to Cleveland, of all things. I'm leaving Panama City, Florida, and coming back to Cleveland. So, I'm sure there's something totally wrong with my brain there, because a nice warm climate, and then you come back to, well, if you don't like the weather here, wait a minute. I had a friend who was a weatherman here. He left because the weather didn't agree with him. It was just terrible. So I come back here, and then I go to work for a small company for about 2 weeks and quit them because they were ripping people off and all that, and I had too moral high ground. They would go, all the people would go to work, and then they would meet at a bar a block away and drink for about 3 or 4 hours, go out and work about an hour, and then they come back. And actually, the president of the company was with all the guys gathered up, and one of the guys stole a ladder from like Ohio Bell, and they brought it back, and the president of the company actually painted over that and put their name on the ladder. And I go, I don't need to have anything to do with this company. So I went to work for a company that repaired medical equipment and computer peripherals, big things like what they call XY plotters, large-scale plotters, and had those kind of clients. They did a lot of what's called ultrasound back then, and that was like in 77. So I worked with them for about a year, and then I kept having people from, like, we did work for Bobby Brooks and a few other customers, and they were constantly calling me. By the way, I was the best service repairman in the country. So when somebody couldn't fix something, I'd be going in places, and I was working 80-hour weeks. I was a beast. So I started my own company because people were, the guys, especially Bobby Brooks, they were saying, you got to come to work because their service on their equipment, it was a company called Gerber, made their big plotters that drew their dress patterns, and their closest service was out of Connecticut, I believe. And I could go in and service something in an hour. They'd have to fly somebody in, get parts. I would, half the time, I could repair right down to the transistor on the boards. Everything I've ever serviced, I could actually go down to the part. And these are some really sophisticated machines. So then we did, the company that I started did a lot of service on, at the beginning times, on ultrasound equipment, which was just new for looking at babies, looking at hearts, a lot of heart stress testing stuff. In fact, I would train the doctors how to run treadmill tests and how to read the EKGs. They know how to read KGs, but how to run the treadmill test and how to, put the patient in on that. And I was selling the machines too. So I was doing all from apples to nuts from one end to the other. But I was buying used machines and refurbishing them and reselling them. And also I was doing, your name gets around, I end up doing works for Bobby Brooks. The next thing you know, I'm doing service for Richmond Brothers, and they've got big laser cutters cutting out suits, and doing work for General Tire and then BF Goodrich and General Tire and all the tire companies. They'd have research equipment, and they'd have stuff that was abandoned. Nobody took care of it anymore. So I was either working on super state-of-the-art stuff or stuff that was extremely old and no one knew how to service it. And so that was my 2 points. Anything that everybody's servicing or doing, I didn't have any interest in that, but stuff that's really, really old, no one knows how to repair, and stuff that's state-of-the-art, no one knows how to repair. And both of those ends are very rewarding because you're actually doing something nobody else can do. And that was my way of getting self-worth, I guess. Everybody has a reason why God put them here, and mine is to do electronics. And in doing the medical stuff, I ended up, when the companies couldn't repair something, they would fly me to Texas or Florida or wherever where the company had worked on something for 2 or 3 weeks. I'd fly in, put my scopes and equipment on the thing. And that was when you could carry a lot more stuff on the planes than you could now. And I'd get it running within an hour down to the transistor and leave. So it was, and then you could always up your prices. And so I love doing that stuff. But in doing that, in doing the radiology stuff, I ended up doing more and more, seeing needs where people in ultrasound specifically, the video recorders, in order to watch, they would videotape things because it was real time at that time. And the original pictures were static like a CAT scan or an MR. But the ultrasound images are moving images. So on their film, they would do just like 9 pictures, but they're static images. The real diagnostic qualities in real-time video. But the video recorders back in the 70s were pretty crummy. They started out with 3/4 inch tape. They went to 1/2 inch tape. The quality was very inferior to the real picture on the screen. And I go, well, I'd look at the things, and I ended up modifying VCRs for like super high resolution using standard tape and super high speed. So we could get anywhere on the tape in like 17 seconds on a 2-hour tape. And then we modified them to where they could do really high resolution like HD TV, which 1/2 inch tape was impossible to do, but nobody told me. I didn't know you couldn't do it. And it's a lot like when Steve Wozniak, what made Apple really happen is when he put a floppy drive on it. And he'd never seen a floppy drive. He'd never worked on it. At that time, they had 8-inch drives. And the 5-inch just came out, and he read the specs, and he goes, well, it needs this, this, and the other. So with 14 chips, he made an interface to talk to it. Then later on, he looked at an 8-inch drive, and that thing's got like 60 chips on the back of it. And he goes, if he had looked at that first, he would have went down a totally different path. But in his ignorance, he gave it what it needed. And kept thinking, I got to be doing something wrong, because why would they use 60 chips when you could do this with 14? Because they don't understand. Most things I find in life, I put my name upside down in my emails. Most things in life, people do things exactly backward and upside down from what they should be. And we'll get into that in a little bit down the road here.
Yeah, it was something I wanted to ask you about.
Yeah, we're going to really go into that. That's a whole story. So anyway, we started repairing this medical equipment, and then we started building high resolution VCRs, and we ended up changing the company from Ultronics Technical Systems to Ultronics Medical Systems. And we were doing teleradiography. We sent MR, CT, nuclear, and ultrasound images to the radiologist at nighttime for the northern part of Ohio for 95% market share.
So the founding insight was really one of deep technical expertise and seeing that something is now possible that people weren't thinking about.
And not hard to do. We started building analysis systems, and other companies, I could tell you a couple of these secrets because it's passé now, but they were taking, in order to do measurements on a cardiac image on ultrasound, they would play a videotape into a storage thing. They could play the tape, they could freeze an image, and to slow-mo the tape to make it go backward and forward was so-so. And I had perfected to be able to slow-mo back and forth as good as a laser disc would be, really sharp image without disturbances in the picture. Well, they would take and play an image into a computer, and they could only grab one image. So as it was playing, they'd snapshot an image, and then they would draw on top of it. But this interface to grab one picture would normally cost about $20,000. It's the only way they could overlay graphics, because the computers run at a different rate than your video does, if that makes sense. They're different resolutions. And I figured out a way real simply by since I was building VCRs, I made the VCR slave to the computer rather than the computer try to slave to the VCR. So I had that at the top of the picture, it's what's called vertical. You start at the top, you run 500 lines down or 250 lines down, then you go back to the top, you run down the screen 250 more lines. It's called interlaced. What I did was the drum on the video recorder in playback, it locks to the internal sync on the VCR. I made it lock to the computer so that when it started its run at the top with the drum at the very beginning of the tape, the computer monitor was at the top. So they could be at the same vertical. They're both at 60. The problem is that the horizontal is a different frequency. There's different amount of lines in a computer than on a TV screen. Even if it's off by a couple of lines, you can't put the two together, or so they thought. And that's why they would take the TV picture, cram it in a memory, run it out at the computer amount of lines. Does that make sense?
Crystal
Am I losing you
clear.
totally? Am I losing you? So what I did was actually I made a really idiotic thing. I made a thing that would switch between showing you the picture from the VCR. They're both starting at the top of the picture at the same time. So if you're a Superman and had really fast eyes, you'd see this line starting at both screens at the same time, because I would sync the video recorder to the computer. Then I would just basically throw a switch and show you a computer screen for 60th of a second. Then I would show you the screen from the VCR, and it would flicker, but you'd overlay the two. So if you looked at it, the two are superimposed, and it doesn't care what the tape deck does. You can run the tape deck backward, forward, any speed you want. The computer didn't care. It doesn't know anything about the video recorder. They're not locked together. The computer's rock solid. The VCR is not. And since I synced the two together, you could do overlay. So you could measure what's called cardiac output. You can measure a picture of the heart long axis, and you could do another when they did the ultrasound short axis. And you know how much the heart's pumping out. So we started building computer analysis systems, which was the outgrowth. Then as we were building more and more computer systems, we realized the real business is the video recorders, because I could sell those to everybody that makes these analysis systems that cost $80,000, $100,000, and I could ship that. You didn't have to ship a whole desk with an Apple II computer and a bit pad and monitors and disk drives and software. No matter what you wrote in software, it never satisfied the doctors, because you print out a report and you'd have a place for the doctor to sign on the lower right, and you get a call. Well, our doctors always sign on the lower left. Jeez, your software is never finished, because no matter what you do, somebody out there is going to say, well, but I don't like the background color. It has nothing to do with the basic thing that you're trying to accomplish. So we got in the video recorder business, and we ended up doing probably about 85% of the cath labs in the country had our recorders in them, because we could get anywhere really fast. And it had all these little cute things like a normal VCR has buttons. It's stupid stuff. That's why everything's upside down in life. You get a VCR, the buttons light up when you hit them. Well, you're in a dark room. What the shit good is that? You want them to be lit before you hit them. So we'd have them dim, and when you hit them, they'd go bright. So you know which mode you're in, but you could see to hit the button. Otherwise, you're in a dark cath lab. The lights are all off. And it's like, this is the way VCR should be. And when you turn it off, the picture would loop through the VCR. And we even had it where the VCR was smart enough that in a fluoro lab, when you swallow a cookie or you do what's called barium swallows, it would trigger on the image. It didn't even need an interface in the hardware. It would take the video signal, the image, and it would look at the image. When it sees a picture come on from the guy stepping on the X-ray switch, it would start recording it. And by the way, we had the recorder. A normal VCR takes about 7 seconds to get going. And this is like 1 inch, $100,000 Ampex recorders with big tapes and big reel-to-reels. Even a half-inch tape, it takes 7 seconds. It winds back, goes forward. We could start up in a 1/7 of a second from dead stop. And we'd stay in pause for an hour and a half without hurting the tape. So we did all the things you need in clinical, and we had FDA approval. We had there's certain measurements of AC line leakage, all this technical garbage that you have to do to be medically approved. But we met all those specs, and so we sold the pajinkies out of these things. We put a different, we kept a commercial recorder. In fact, we were number 2 in the world outside of HP for buying those commercial recorders, but we'd do the Shelby Mustang thing to them. We would get them, and then we would soup them up, and we'd put a cover where you couldn't drop blood and stuff into it. All the other covers were vented and did all the right power cords and all that stuff. So we're building these VCRs and doing pretty good with that. Then we did a lot with teleradiography. We did a lot of sending these images. That I'm so happy that we're out of that business, because you get calls 24 hours a day. And some of them were good enough for stand-up comedy. Doctors would call at 2 a.m. and like, you got to go to the hospital and fix that transmitting machine. I'm not receiving pictures. And we were able to call in, and this is back in the, early 80s, like 84. You could call in and have it send me the pictures. I could take that hospital and have it send to all the other hospitals. All the other hospitals could send to me, but not one of them could send to the doctor. And you go, well, I really think the problem's on your end, doctor. Oh, no, it's not on my end. This is a brand new computer. It's a brand new computer. You've never used it with this software before? Nope, but it should work. Well, what modem do you have? And at that time, the software, for a lot of reasons. One's FDA says this is what you're going to use. This is what it's been tested with. Does that make sense? And they have a list of 4 modems that it would work with. And it only was guaranteed to work with those 4 modems, if it even did. So if it wasn't one of those 4 modems, you're on your own and you're not legal either. And the guy goes, well, it's a so-and-so modem. A modem's a modem. You go, well, fuel's fuel. Let's put some diesel in your car. And it would be like, these guys have gone to med school and they're working on people, but if everybody could send to everybody else and nobody could send to him from any hospital, where do you think the problem might be? It probably is not at the hospital he's trying to get pictures from. So you get these things at 2:00 in the morning, and this was like for years we did teleradiography and small pack systems. We'd send images from the ER up to radiology and ER to pediatrics, because that way you don't move the film around, and now it's all digital and it's gone further. So that went pretty good until, basically 9/11 happened. 9/11, I worked about 10 years without taking a vacation. So things were real terse. We had, by the way, and all this was going on, we amassed a huge amount of real estate, like blocks of real estate, which we paid cash for. So we had all these other businesses going. I had a liquor license. We had a bar. We had a high-end stereo store. We were the one of the first companies to really push Laserdisc players, and we had 8,500 laser movies, and we'd run them for $1 a night. Well, if you had a big screen TV of 10 foot back in '84, and you played a videotape on it, it'd be like watching rocks on a picture. It'd be so blurry. But a Laserdisc looked pretty good, and the sound was awesome. So because we had the software, we had customers, and because we had the software, we had the disc, which you don't have to rewind and never wear out. We sold more laser players out of one little store in Slavic Village than the Sun and Circuit City for every store in Ohio combined. So we did a landmark business with Laserdisc. Wow. It was great. And when DVDs first came out, I had a brother living in California. I actually went off with Toshiba. And while all this is going on, I've been off the Skywalker Ranch for THX, and I ended up doing beyond the consumer stuff. I ended up being the TAP representative for Ohio, which I could say now I'd go in and, evaluate the movie theaters that were THX. If that's the Thompson Holman Experiment is what that stands for. And Thompson Holman was their head of engineering for Star Wars. And, they did Star Wars. They went out and listened to it in the theater. They go, this sucks. We've got to put a standard down so all the movies are the same and the same quality. And that's what Lucasfilm was all about. So I would go and sit in the theaters and make sure everything was working the way it should. And that included like the signs on the bathrooms, what the parking lot looked like. It's all about if people go to a THX theater, which is kind of not so much anymore. But at that time, it was, they have to pay a lot of money. And it's saying, it's like, when you go to McDonald's, you know what you're going to get. It may be mediocre, but you know what you're going to get. It's going to be the exact amount of pickles. You're not going to get an extra pickle. You're not going to be one less. And you're going to get X amount of ketchup and mustard, and it's going to be cooked at a certain temperature at that atmosphere, at that height. And it's going to be, the French fries will always be cooked the same. So when you go to a THX theater, you know that it's going to be the exact same as it will be at another theater in California or Canada or, wherever you go. So I would do that for a while. So anyway, after 9/11, I go, you know what? I am just tired. I've had enough of this. I decided to kind of, and we had a new invention that was pretty pronounced. We were going to build an analysis system to look at x-rays digitally, because they just came out with digital on viewing stations. The viewing stations were $500,000. And I had one with a really cool thing. We'd build a little device that would capture images from MR, CT, nuclear, ultrasonic, could take 10 inputs and send them to the teleradiography that was the older stuff. Everybody else was trying to convert their ultrasound machines to doing network stuff and sending them that way, which is a lot of companies were doing that. I went the other way because you couldn't change horses on a doctor be reading for 4 hospitals with legacy software, and he couldn't do both at the same time. So we had a little box that was pretty cool. It sold for about 20 grand. It was phenomenal profit. I think we paid $200. 100 of that was the software license. We had our own little computer. All it had was a little green light on it. And it ran a monitor that would show what's coming from the CAT scanner, and you would adjust what's called the window and level, and the thing would take its own pictures, which is really cool. So we had somebody, a major group was going to buy us, give me a lot of money, and give me a really great salary. So for about a year, we danced with them. And right when 9/11 happened, we were going to actually do the deal 2 weeks later. And that stopped that deal. And that group went from having 400 employees to having, like now, probably 10. So if I'd gotten on board with them, it probably would have been a downhill run for us anyway. So with that, I kind of sat back for a couple of years and repaired I think we put about 3,500 VCRs into the marketplace across all the cardiac, some of them in ultrasound. We had a fair amount in military. A lot of research places used our VCRs, and we kind of made a name for it. It was a real slick looking box. It was really cool. We did all the trade shows. We'd go to the American Heart, American College, the RSNA. We'd do all the big trade shows around the country, and knew all the head radiologists that, Cedars-Sinai and the Mayo Clinic and all these. We had stuff everywhere. And it was great because we'd put it in the universities first, and it would just spread. They would tell their friends, and it's a very close-knit society. And when we picked up all the OEMs on our stuff, when you got a $2 million lab, our VCRs were $10,000 to $20,000. The competitors were $100,000, $80,000, and we outperformed them. And our material, it was $600 for a reel-to-reel hour-long tape. Ours was $20 for 2 hours. Wow. So you do the math, and you could store them on a shelf. They were on reel-to-reels. You had to wind the thing, and put it in all that craziness. So Sony ended up buying video recorders from us, actually, but put with their analysis system, because everybody went away from Beta, and they certainly weren't going to put a JVC or a Panasonic or some other machine in with their stuff. So, but putting a Ultronics Medical, that's different. So we had a great run with the VCR. So I sat back for a couple of years. I just repaired the machines because we had enough of them in the field, and their mean failure time was 8 years, and people used these things for a long time. And I'd get them back and do a complete rebuild and send them out. It was a one-man show, probably made more in my pocket than when we were running the business because I didn't have all the overhead and all that stuff. So then that finally kind of wound down a little bit. And then I've always had this passion for audio. So the real story is we have an acquaintance, and this acquaintance was doing inner city preaching at the Cleveland Boys and Girls Club gym. Now, if you've ever heard anybody speak in a gym, it's less than ideal, right? It's like Echo City. So you go in a gym, I would take a set of really good speakers. They're a company called Tannoy. It's a real high end. They're like number 2 in the studios worldwide outside of America. And a nice mixer and all this stuff. You go to the back of the gym and you go, I have no idea what this guy is saying. It's like being in a cavern. And by the way, this guy was a former drug dealer. And he had brought 160 people to know Christ. Most of them as former customers. So he'd have this place packed because they're giving them food and jackets and everything else. But I think a lot of the people were there for the food, the jackets, and all the stuff because they certainly weren't hearing what he had to say. I'm there and I couldn't understand what he was saying. So I actually went home after a few of these little, church services on Sunday in the Boys Club gym. I go home and I pray about it. And everything I've ever built, by the way, has been in lucid dreams. Whenever I've had a problem, I've slept on it, and in color, I'm a color dreamer, I would do all the circuitry. If you ever watch like the prisoner of war things, you all the circuitry, I'm working it all out in my mind. And since I've done the stuff in the military, and since I did the stuff with ultrasound, and ultrasound's really kind of simple. It's called beamforming, and I could give you a quick explanation if anybody will put them to sleep out in the audience.
I would love to hear it.
Imagine, if you will, a perfectly flat pond, right? There's no waves. If you drop a rock, as we all know, because I think most of us have dropped rocks in the pond, it goes out in waves, big circles. Now, if you line up 10 people at the beach on that perfectly smooth pond, and you line them up 10 feet apart, and you have one guy drops a rock in the pond, and the next guy counts to 20 and he drops a rock in the pond, and the next guy counts to 20 and he drops a rock in the pond. Those waves will combine and you'll have a perfect straight wave going off on a 45-degree angle to where the last guy drops the rock. Can you imagine that?
I'm visualizing.
If you start at the outer two guys and they drop rocks at the same time, and then the guy in the middle is the last one, it'll make a concave looking wave. And that's how they focus ultrasound, is how they fire those crystals. There's usually 64 to 128 crystals, and they fire them in groups, and so they can point it back and forth. And that's actually how 5G works with their antennas. It's the delay between them, and that's how they focus what they're doing. Okay, so if that makes sense. So what we came up with is a speaker. If you have a line of speakers, say we got 9 speakers, and if you put your head right next to the center speaker, that center speaker is only going a couple inches to hit your ear, right? The one at the top's going a lot of inches to hit your ear. So sound is very short wavelengths, and your human hearing is most sensitive to time delay. If you change volume on something, you have to double the volume for human. It could be 2 dB on professional people, but you got to double the volume. It's called 3 dB. You have to double the volume to perceive a difference. So if you have 10 watts, you got to go to 20 watts. If you have a receiver that's 100 watts and you got one at 125, they're identical volume. Identical. You got to go to 200 to perceive it gets a little bit louder. So you can see it starts using power really, really fast. You go 1 watt, 2 watt, you're in the thousands before you know it. And frequency, everybody goes, well, James Taylor sounds a little bassy on those speakers. And you go, has he ever visited your house and sang to you without singing through a PA system? You have no idea what James Taylor sounds like. You know what piano sound like? You know what violins sound like? But most things in a movie is totally man-made. You have no idea what that boom is supposed to sound like. And most things in people singing, you have no idea what their voice sounds like because you've never actually heard them. Right? So your idea of frequency is garbage. You don't have any idea what's too high, too low, unless you've worked with the people. But time delay, you're really sensitive to. If somebody talks at the right side of you're standing on your right side, it hits your right ear, and then a few itsy bitsy bit in time, it hits your left ear. Same volume. That little delay will tell you in tenths of a degree where that person is standing in the room. That little delay around your nose. And with mine, I've got a really big nose. It's a big delay. So my brain actually calculates for that. But on most people, it's a short delay. So maybe that's why I'm a little bit better at hearing. I got that big delay working for me. So what happens is that if you've got a line of speakers, the top speaker is back in time. So if you gave it a pulse, you'd see a bunch of pulses if you were to electronically look at it. It wouldn't be one pulse. So it's like guys are rowing a boat and everybody's kind of rowing. There's 9 guys and they're all rowing at different speeds, but the boat's kind of moving forward. You get sound coming out of this thing, but it's blurry. Can you picture that? Because things are arriving and it's just like you got double vision. It's making everything smooched together. Well, by time aligning the speakers, and we're doing it passively in the speakers, companies have time aligned speakers. They put an amplifier on every single speaker and they do the delays digitally, and it's a network thing and it takes time. So it's actually back in time. They can't do it at real time. And what we do is we have a secret sauce in our box to where when we send the sound, they're all time aligned so that the thing's got 3.5-inch speakers. That 3.5-inch speaker is very light and easy to move. Okay. All of them combined, the overall surface area is rather large. When you put 9 times the surface area of the little one guy. So you got this big thing moving really fast with a lot of control, but it's all focused on the center speaker. So when it sends sound out, instead of being 90 degrees up and down and 90 degrees side to side, we're 3 degrees up and down. It shoots straight ahead and almost nothing side to side. So we've got these, they cover the Cleveland Zoo with 10 of these.
Oh, wow.
They go thousands of feet outdoors, and the volume when you're 10 feet away sounds exactly like to your perception that when you're 1,000 feet away. and 180 degrees across. So we put one or two of them on a press box in a football field. We've got them at Western Reserve Academy. They've got them in their chapel. They've got them on their soccer field. They've got them on their football field. It will cover a whole football field. You could clearly hear it in the visitor side, and you could sit underneath it and be on this call because the way that it focuses the sound. And incidentally, that's the whole thing. Like I put my name upside down. When you go to a meeting, my big beef is most things are done because this is the way people's always done them. You go in a meeting room, the speakers are in the ceiling. I don't know anyone other than somebody deformed whose ears point up. Your ears point forward. You reject sound behind you. So if it's above you, if you go home, and you could try this, put on it, get two identical TVs, set one behind you, put a program on, watch the screen in front of you, play the sound from behind you. And if it's a movie you haven't seen, you'll have trouble following the movie, even though it's crystal clear, because it doesn't sync. It's like when you look off the road, you drive off the road. So localization is a big deal on intelligibility. If somebody's speaking and the sound's coming from where they're at, you think that's them talking louder. It shouldn't sound like a PA system. Sound should be natural. And most sound systems, everybody sounds like, you hear them on most sound systems because they have a horn and a woofer. The woofer's got a lot of mass. And when you start the woofer moving back and forth, it literally is going about 120 miles an hour, stopping dead and change direction. So it's got too much. If you take a train and try to stop it, it isn't going to stop. But these little bitty speakers, they can stop on a dime. So the clarity is way, way beyond what you'll get with a big speaker, but you got the same amount of air. All you care about at the end of the day is how much air can you move. And if you don't try to go low frequencies, 95% of all energy is 100 hertz down. That's like a low bump, okay? So when you're trying to get a speaker that's a 15 or an 18 to go down, they can't. I don't think there's any can go down to 20 hertz. They claim 20, but they really are doing 40 or 50 or 60. They can't do it without doing another frequency that's like if they do 20, there's more 40 than 20. So you hear bass, but it's blurry. It's not like to do it properly. We've taken like one of our beamformers down to the Canton Fairgrounds, and they had 8 subwoofers. Each one would be the size of a small refrigerator laying on its side, and we could cover that fairgrounds with one of these little stinking columns. They're only 40 inches long, and they're 6 inches wide, 5 inches deep, and they weigh 17 pounds, and they're weatherproof. So when we went about building the speakers, we did it from A to Z. We made them 40 inches long because the array is within a human hearing when you're sitting or standing from 95% of the people. And by being 40 inches long, when you do extrusions, they're 10 feet. And if my great math skills from South High inner city is right, that's 3. So we don't like to waste stuff. I'm not going to pay for dumpsters. We are so frugal, it's unbelievable. So when we cut something, it's thirds exactly. Okay. And when you ship stuff, because we plan on shipping thousands and tens of thousands of this, because when people find out what we're doing, by the way, all of our sales, we've sold about 400 of these over the past few years, have all been referrals from our customers. Not even referrals. We'll put them at VAS, for example, VASJ in Euclid. They call somebody in North Canton and say, you got to buy this. We did. Alex Bevan buys it. He tells all of his friends, you got to hear these things because they're outrageous. They're just so different than anything anybody's ever heard. We'll put a microphone dead on the front of one of these things and scream and not get feedback. We go in and do a demo in a church. They just write you a check and hand it to you. It's like, all the problems with sound is because people don't look at the problem from beginning to end. And it's everywhere in life is that way. When you go in a shower, I always use this example, you reach through to adjust the heat of the shower. So if it's scalding, you're reaching through the scalding water to adjust the shower. Every bathroom's plumbed like this. And you go, well, if you ran the plumbing another couple of feet, you could put the knob on the side or the back side of the tub. Oh, but that's more plumbing. You just brought it 300 damn feet. What's another 3 feet? It's like stupidity. It's like you get in your car and, you have to have your headlights on when your wipers are on. So since they ever started making cars, if you turn on your wipers, your headlights should come on. You shouldn't have to do, when you enter somebody on your iPhone, and Palm did this, and UPS does it. You enter somebody's address on your phone, and it starts off in the alphabet keyboard. And you go, how many people do you know whose address starts with a letter? How many? The majority start with a number. And actually, if you put in the zip code, it should automatically put in the city and state and all that other nonsense, and then you put their address and it should go straight to the number pad because everybody's address starts with a number. So most things are backwards. You go in a bathroom, right? So you go in an elevator. I got this little thing where you go in, you got to have a medical exam, right? So you go in, the first thing, it's a 2-story building. You go in the elevator. What do you see? First floor, second floor, and you go, shit, what floor am I on? How the hell do I get there? What's the other floor? Shouldn't they just, and buttons cost a lot of money, right? So wouldn't it be better just have one button that says, go to the other floor, or go to the other damn floor, or just go? Where are you going to go? If you're on 1, you can only go to 2. If you're on 2, you can only go to 1. Why have button 1 and 2? To me, that seems like absurd, right? It's just like when you do the pole vault backward, the guy goes like, oh, damn, we've been doing it wrong all along. Overhead speakers are horrible because they got to be up really high in order to distribute. So you need an awful lot of them. And it costs money to run stuff in the ceilings. In a gym, we did Beechwood High School with 2 of our columns. We took down 12 of a 3-letter company, starts with J. Much better coverage, much better sound. We put a subwoofer in the corner. You'd swear the sound's coming out of those little columns because we go down to 100 hertz. We don't try to do lows because when you speak, a telephone goes from 300 to 3,000 for speech intelligibility. That's all you need. We go from 100 to 18,000 ruler flat. That's one of the reasons ruler flat on frequency and time, more importantly. That's why when we put a mic up right next to the speaker, it doesn't squeal. Because it's exactly, if you look at people when they EQ, they cut down the squealing frequency because it's actually hotter than the rest of the stuff. Does that make sense? So we've gone in a different way. And plus the cabinets generate sound. So we've got a cabinet that's deader than a doornail. We fill 18 little chambers with something we call WAM, wave absorption material. So that when you thump your hand on the side of the cabinet, it would sound like a music box. A music box, you don't make any noise besides the sound coming out of the speaker. The box creates its own sound, right? So its sound coming off the side of the box is trying to kill the sound that's coming off the front of the box. Well, we're real dead in there. People don't realize that the sound on a speaker, as loud as it is in front of a speaker, and they fill them with fiberglass and all that, the back of the speaker is the same cone, right? You can agree. The cone on the front is the same cone looking at the back of the speaker. So as loud as it is in your room at loud volumes, it's that loud in that little space behind the speaker.
Yeah.
So what do you do with that energy? Well, we absorb it. We turn it to heat, basically. And then when you look at a grill, everybody's familiar with the metal grills we're talking commercial speakers, not home stuff, okay?
Yeah.
You look at a grill on a speaker, okay? It's got these little perforations. Well, if you take that grill off and put it underneath the water faucet, you'll find out the air ain't getting through there real good. Only 40% of the air is getting through those puny little holes, trying to force itself through the holes. So it's bouncing back some of that energy to the cone and then through to the inside of the cabinet, coming back, hitting the cone again, hitting the face. So when you have a pulse, it just keeps pulsing forever. What we did was we have bars, stainless steel bars that we powder coat. And what they do is the sound comes out. It's like looking at just straight bars like in a prison because the sound wants to get out of this jail cell, right? So they're round. And since it's round, it does the same thing as an airplane wing. As it hits that round thing, it has to build up pressure on the sides of that round bar. And then on the front side, it's got a negative energy. So they actually goes and forms right back to what it was. You're not breaking in a bunch of little holes all trying to fill up and all that. And by the way, it's got frets just like on a guitar. The whole front of these things is a solid chunk of aluminum. The outer box is plastic because plastic's weatherproof, da-da-da-da-da-da. It's got some great features. Plastic does. And it's indestructible pretty much. In fact, we cover the whole thing with truck bed liner, and you could throw it down the stairs. You could jump up and down on these things. The bars being stainless steel, you literally can lay it on its back and jump up and down on it. But we don't disturb the sound, and we take the heat that's inside the box, because if you put 100 watts to a speaker, consider it the same as a 100-watt light bulb. So even if you know nothing about wattage, if you grab a hold of, if it's not an LED, you grab a hold of a 100-watt bulb, it's hot. These speakers can handle 350 watts. Damn hot in the cabinet. 95% of that energy turns to heat, not sound. 95%. So you have to fill those little heat lamps. That's what's going on inside the box. Where we heat up the front baffle, it goes up those little frets every, however it is. I think we got 4 of them. And it goes up the bars, and then the speakers are blowing over the bars and cooling themselves. So everything about it is. So anyway, my whole thing in life is to change the world. So we probably have not grown the company as much as we should, because I'm truly a Steve Wozniak. I'm about changing the world for intelligibility. And I don't think we're in the speaker business. We're in the communications business. As I mentioned, I know an awful lot about video. I had the second Mac in the world. I modified a 3-tube projector, and Steve Wozniak sat next to me. We projected a 35-foot screen with what's called 100 looms, which is like dim as shit. But that was considered a big deal back then. Those 3 tubes had liquid in front of them. It was boiling the liquid to do that, 3 CRTs. But I was able to make it sync to what the Apple computer puts out, which is 23 kilohertz. Standard video is 15 kilohertz. It was able to show, and he still remembered that. He came to Cleveland here a few years ago. He was down at I had not seen him since 77 or since 84. I'd met him before then in the 80s, in the 70s, before the Apple thing, before the Macintosh thing. But in 84, they brought the Mac to Cleveland, and we were the second group to see it. The Boston Users Group was first to be in existence. Cleveland was second. We had over 1,000 members. So at Independence High School, we had 1,000 people. And, the fire department didn't know, but we unplugged all the lights because you had to have it really dark in there. We didn't have any lights. None. It was pitch black in there. But you were able to see it. And Steve sat next to me and he says, that's the best picture he'd ever saw outside of a Hughes light valve, which is the only thing that would present that picture. And I think they were about $80,000 in 84. So, my little homemade switch thing, I'd switch it for normal video or for high def, and it worked. So he came to EJ Thomas. EJ Thomas, is that the place in Akron? He came there a few years ago and spoke, and he gave his story. It's a great story. He's a really funny guy if you ever get a chance to meet him. In fact, I'll tell you a story about Steve from the 70s after I'm done with this little spiel. So, and that's part of the spiel. So we get free tickets. So there's a whole bunch of us come down. I've got a good friend. We go down, and EJ Thomas seats 3,500 people, and they're in long rows, and you exit at the end of the rows. So when you come down, everybody comes in from the side. You're all across. It's a great auditorium. So Steve's up front. He gives his spiel about how he started Apple Computer and all that stuff. It's all about passion. It's all about loving. And Steve is all about making the world a better place. So at that meeting, they go at the end, and I talked to the girls that sat us, and I said, well, I got to tell you, there's a time when Steve gave me the best laugh of my life in the 70s. And she goes, well, how's that? And I go, well, we're in the Jarvis Center in New York City. And I didn't know Steve, but Steve's in front of us. Imagine the brightest yellow jacket you can imagine, with the Woz embroidered with 5-inch thick, big letters. The Woz, a big semicircle. You picture that?
Sure, yeah.
And he's walking with 6 or 8 of the guys from Apple. Apple was probably doing about $100 million a year in sales. They weren't a giant company. Apple was just kind of getting started. And at that time, you'd go to the trade show, and people would have folding tables with little boards and stuff that they'd make. We had 4 guys from our Apple users group went, and they had booths. One of the guys had a little thing it's almost like a notcher that the kids use for your paper route, that the floppies cost $25 a piece for 120K of data. Well, the backside's the same material, so you could put a notch in it and flip it over and save $25. So he's selling those things for like $10 or something. So Steve would stop at every table, look at what they were doing, and generally write a check if he liked it, which I doubt most people ever cash. So he's making off both ways. He gets the product, and he feels morally obligated. He's paid you, whether or not you ever collect the money. So he stops at one booth, and there's myself with probably 20 guys. And he looks down at the booth. He picks up a little printer interface card, a little PC card that would fit in the Apple II. And he looks at it. He's turning it over. He loves to look at the way the artwork is because he designs. He puts chips on things, and he looks at the chip and he goes, "This is an 83502 or whatever the part number was. It's called a peripheral interface adapter." He says PIA. Peripheral for peripherals is the printer. Okay, interface is the interface of the computer, and it's adapted to computers. So you can plug in a printer to the computer and have it send data back and forth. He looks at this and he says, "Well, the only problem with that chip is it has trouble handling the interrupts on pin 31. The guy reaches up, grabs it out of his hand, and goes, "What the F do you know about computers?" And he looks down at the guy, doesn't say a word. He looks up to the ceiling, which is like 60 feet tall. He humps his shoulders and walks down the aisle. And everybody is laughing so hard, I thought I was going to piss my pants. I get to the end of the row. I swear I thought I broke a rib. I'm sitting leaning against the wall. Tears are pouring down my face. And for months after that, I'd be out with my friends. We'd be sitting eating breakfast or lunch or something. And somebody would look over at somebody else and go, "What the F do you know about computers?" And here this guy said, his show, and he doesn't know who he is. I mean, that to me. So we tell this girl that, and she goes, "Well, you know him. Why don't you go down? They've got like 10 rows between this roped off to where the podium is. I'm in the first row with my friend because that's for all the college people and all the dignitaries. So we're down there, and he gives his spiel. His spiel's incredible, talking about how he started and how he worked with Steve Jobs and all this. And at the end, they go, "Well, is there any questions?" He'll take a couple of questions now. So one of the guys with us jumps up and he says, "I've got a DVD from the videotape when you came in '84 and showed the Mac to our users group, and I'd like to give you a copy of that." And he goes, "Well, actually, Steve Jobs didn't want to have users groups because he was all about tying everything in and not letting people mess with the things. So the Macintosh was a totally closed architecture. The Apple, and Steve to this day, it's to share with mankind. It's all open. Told you the DOS. He told you all the software. You can make the thing do anything you wanted to." So we're down on the front. So he says that, and then he says any other things, and I pop up and he goes, "I remember you." He says, "What are you doing down?" I go, "Well, I'm building speakers that don't give echoes in big echoey areas and don't give feedback." And they go, "Great, that's super. I'm glad things are doing well for you." And they go, "Well, that's the end of the question. 2 questions." Everybody's emptying the place out. The girl comes over. She goes, "Are you going to go back and see him in the green room?" And I go, "What green room?" She goes, "Well, it's on the other side." Well, we had to go all the way out because they exit from the sides and all the way around the building. So we get in line, right? There's all these people, and the person letting the people into the green room that's backstage says, "Well, you don't have an orange ticket." And the guy that ran the place was a guy named Doll. And he looks at me and he says, "He knows him. Let him go back." So I go in the back, and there's a buffet line. Everybody's over there. He's talking to one guy. So I go up and I talk to Steve. I get his card, his personal card with his phone number and all this stuff. And we chat for a good while. And sure enough, he emails me the next day. And, it's great. But we're 2 of a kind. And my thing with this business is not taking off as well as it should because I'm about communications. I'm about what's in my brain to appear in your brain as undisturbed as possible. But if you got a friend, whatever comes out of your mouth and lands on their ears is not what your mouth put out. So when you're communicating, be it because of race differences or ethnic differences or religious differences or background, whether you're poor or you're rich.
Even language. We don't think in letters.
And we don't think in letters and visually. So if you've got really poor visual, like everybody does PowerPoints, ass backward. They should be forced to look at a projection screen the size of what they're going to use in a room and totally do their PowerPoint on that screen because everybody puts little bitty shit you can't read from the back of the room. So it's just wasting everybody's time. And people are watching the PowerPoint rather than the person speaking. They're looking at that instead of, and it's looking at you to get you involved with the people because it's that eye contact that shows you the soul of a person. And it's the facial expressions. And we miss that. We miss out on that. So communications is about what's in my brain to be able to formulate in your brain so we're both in sync about what we're talking about. And you'll know that. And especially after doing teleradiography and all the stuff I've done in medical and other things, you're talking about one thing, they're imagining something totally different. You know, when you talk to your dog, he kind of gets it. Food and his name. But they get it. They can sense when you're not feeling good. They can sense when you're angry. Because we have abandoned that because of all of our speech. We're so busy. Of course, here I am talking away, and I'm not giving you a chance to say anything, but we don't really listen to other people. We don't really convey information. I want to make the world a better place. So I'm not the kind of guy to build the business, and it will build on its own in spite of me. You know, it always has. But I'm not about profit, and I'm not about, I believe fully, I'm in the inner city of Cleveland, Slavic Village. I've done a lot with, I was the lieutenant governor for the Kiwanis and all this. I'm more about giving. I'm a giving person. There's different kind of people. But I believe that if you help other people, you're going to make it in the world. Because that's really all that matters, is at the end of the day, your network is your net work. Your net worth is your network. But it's knowing that you've had other people meet their goals and accomplish what they want to accomplish and help them. That's the best feeling you could get. What other questions do we have? Manufacturing in Cleveland. How long have we gone already? 6 hours already? I don't know. We're just getting rolling here. So Cleveland is always, when it comes to software, they're all about, everybody's about software. And those companies, I would dare say a lot of them, it's like that hockey stick and then it falls back the other way. Or they sell out and they move out of the city. They move out of Cleveland. Some of the biggest companies, as soon as they grow, they're out of here. Manufacturing is the backbone of this country. It really is. But it's like a bastard child, you know, and we've never looked for investment. In fact, we've always been totally cash. We've owned all of our vehicles. We own like a couple million worth of test equipment. And that's part of why we're successful, because we're able to actually prove things the way it should be. And we're clever. We're not smart, but we're really clever. So it's all about building communities and people. So you can't say you want to support the inner city and support people to make their lives better and then do it out in the suburbs. Because right now, especially, people there's no transportation out there. So the companies out in far out there, there's no way for people to get there to work. You want to help people enrich their lives. I've never had anyone work for me. They've always worked with me. And when we were building the recorders, we had a little sign up says, we had 2 of them. The next person this machine's going to be used on is your kid or your grandkid. Because sometimes when the kids are teenagers, you go, oh, shit, you know. It's like, it's pretty rough with kids, right? I mean, when my daughter first got her first house, I'm a great-grandfather, by the way. I don't look at, people on the radio can't tell how old I am. So I definitely have a face for audio, don't I? I definitely have a face for audio. So I belong to AES, by the way. We need to get an AES group going here, the Audio Engineering Society. I was on a Zoom with them yesterday. They're in Columbus. We got to start a Cleveland one. And you got to come to my lab. We've got a theater in the basement better than anything in Cleveland. We did one movie theater. We did one down in Loudonville, Ohio. People say we put the loud in Loudonville. It's not loud, but what it does do is it's got 10 of our speakers, which is outrageous because it's got 3 stories. So you have to since we're so straight ahead, you have to have something up high or you don't get anything. On a football field, that 3 degrees will hit the other side. Does that make sense? Because of the distance. Wow. So it's like perfect for football fields or soccer fields. So anyway, we made their basement into a subwoofer in this old theater. It's the kind like, the Palace and all these. You got to look at this place. And they do phenomenal movies. See, I've gone down there 3 times. We'll actually go down on a Sunday and watch a movie because the sound is insane. And it's only 5.1. It's not Atmos. It's not 7.1. But the sound is insanely good. And you could sit anywhere in that room. You could sit next to the left surround and hear all the other speakers. Most theaters, if you sit all the way up at the front right, you can't hear the center channel. There's right, center, left across the front. You can't hear it. You can hear every speaker no matter where you sit. It sounds the same volume. So if you're sitting all the way down in the front, you clearly hear that left. And we only got to put 1 speaker on each side, not the whole row coming down. It's been 3 times I've been down there where somebody will have the sound of a shotgun and everybody in the damn theater jumps out of their seat, looks at every other person and laughs because the sound is so tight and so dynamic. If I set off a shotgun behind you, Jeff, I can guarantee you will not stay in that seat. It may be a wet spot where you sat, but you will not be in that seat. You'll jump. And it's natural. If a firecracker goes off behind you, but Theater sound doesn't do that generally. It's loud, it's boomy, it's hissy, it's good sound. Don't get me wrong. Theaters have very good sound, but they cannot do live sound and movie sound over the same system. They do live acts from Nashville. They do plays. They do school plays. That same system, you could run a mic out and not get feedback. If you put a mic on a speaker system in a theater, it's going to howl beyond belief because they don't need to be flat. They want to really impress you with the highs and the lows and the mid-range. It wants to just be in your face. Does that make sense? When you go and listen to a movie theater, it's like right in your face. It's real sizzly and real. In fact, since the 50s, they've got a little thing called the X curve. They increased the highs 2 dB per octave starting at 2000. It gets more and more highs. To reach the back of the room, the highs get eaten up because of the room. So it's sizzling when you're up front. It's sizzling. And that's built into all movies is the X curve. It's part of the format. And to put it in your home, there's one soundtrack for DVDs. They're all too bright. So if you have a THX sound system, they actually have an equalizer that takes that back out and makes it normal for your house because it's made for a big space and you're using it in a small space. And the other systems all have it real sizzly, and it's like fingers on a chalkboard. You're impressed at first, but it wears you out. Wow. So manufacturing here for hardwares is a lot tougher than anything else. But we've got 8 suppliers. We don't build everything ourselves. We've got a place that the laser cuts the metal work for us. We have somebody that powder coats stuff for us. Things are TIG welded. Everything about it. We've got other people supplying us. That's all made in Ohio, baby. Veteran owned, made in Ohio.
Yeah.
We're proud of what we do.
Oh, it's an incredible story. Yeah.
Our future is, everybody goes, well, maybe you'll be bought out by that 4-letter company starts with B or the 3-letter company. And actually Harman, which owns JBL and 48 other sound companies, including Crown amplifiers, they were bought by Samsung a couple of years ago. Well, a lot of that stuff was made in China. And when that happened, I go, do you really believe the South Koreans are going to get in bed with the Chinese? And they very quickly took a lot of the stuff to Mexico. Very quickly. But Harman was bought specifically because Harman owns a gob of patents for near-field communications. And if you're going to have cars self-driving besides the LiDAR stuff, if people are familiar with that, or the cameras, you have to have near-field communications. Like, say, if you're driving down the freeway and a car comes off of a bridge in front of you, everybody for miles back has to know that happened. Then it's much better than you could ever respond as a human. It automatically telegraphs it, just like when you're on Waze. It knows when the traffic's stopped 2 miles ahead. Mm-hmm. That near-field communications is why they bought that company. They did it was like an $8 billion thing. And when you really think about it, what was that silly thing that the virtual reality guy that they were doing on all the iPhones for a little bit? They were chasing them all through the parks and everything about 5 or 6 years ago. Everybody was chasing this little guy that would appear on rocks and you could get him, and they were running all over the country doing it. People were walking in front of cars. They did
like the Pokemon stuff.
The Pokemon. It was in the billions, and they didn't make anything. It was in the billions for Pokemon. In the billions they were doing. In the billions. So when you look at them doing something with one of these 48 sound companies, if it's not gigantic, I don't know that they have interest in the big commercial stuff. They're going to still be making some of the really big arena stuff. But there's only so many arenas and so many gigantic, rock concerts and stuff. They're more interested in the big number guy. They're not going to be interested in little pitty stuff. So I think we're at an opportune time. Omar Bose is gone. Klipsch has been gone for a while. And the people that started most of these there's only a few sound companies doing commercial. There are gazillions doing, retail, residential stuff. I mean, there's so many speaker companies out there. It's unbelievable, but not in commercial. And we've got other cute things about ours. Ours will hang with 2 screws on the wall, and you hang it, and you can put a padlock. You unlock the padlock, you lift it up. It runs. We could go 500 feet with telephone wire, and not lose enough volume where you could perceive it's gotten softer, not lose 2 decibels at 500 feet of telephone wire. And copper is expensive. So you can actually wire up a church or a place with a staple gun like they used to use to run your telephone wire. We run on telephone wire, and we're passive. We don't have to plug it in. We don't need a computer to run it. So we've addressed everything that's the negative things about speakers. But it's more than that. We've got a whole vision about what we're going to do in the future. We've got some great things we want to do in education, because that's really where the passion is. We got to get the kids to have a great education and a great work experience and really be able to connect with each other and connect with the teacher. And you can't connect with a teacher in a classroom. Anything that's over 60 feet, you can't communicate. You're either shouting, and the kid in the back of the room doesn't get an education. I feel blessed my name starts with an A. Geez, I was at the front row. So I got the best education going just because I start with an A. Hey, what's the odds of that happening? And it's a weird name. Althar is so much different than anybody else. You put Althar, I'm the first dad on the web. I don't have to do any SEO stuff. We're right at the top. Right at the top. We figure we'll end up buying all those other companies and make them a little division of ours.
Yeah.
That's what I tell people. Be bought by them. We're going to buy them. And you got to think big. I'm on a thing. You should join this too. I'm on a thing every Friday night with Jeff Hazlitt. He was the head of all marketing worldwide for Kodak, Eastman Kodak worldwide. And he has a group called C-Suite Network. That's by invite. And it's people from all over the world. And I'm on there every Friday night. We get together, but they have meetings at the beginning of the month, and they'll have the lady that does all the buying for the Navy. We'll talk. And not only talk, but you're on Zoom where you could actually talk face to face with that person. It's not just, and the same, they've had the person from General Motors in charge of their big stuff, and you're talking to them one-on-one. So the friends I've made, I've got a friend that, he sells, it's Gentleman Cigars. He's got a trolley that's in Nashville, Tennessee. Yeah. And so I've gone to visit those guys, and you just meet people. I was over in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago meeting with one of their people. And I got a free ride. I did the sound down in Disney World last year for an event with, I think they had 6,000 people on the web and about 100 people at the diner. And they had the guy from Mickey Mouse. He's older now, obviously. Yeah. And I did the sound and the video down there. And I got paid for my whole thing to go down for a free vacation, a really fancy hotel and all that, because of C-Suite. So you really got to reach out and expand. I think Cleveland, everybody looks at Cleveland, they go, oh, you got to go out to the coast. I think we've got so much brain power here and so much talent because of the medical, obviously, because of our industry, and because we have a heart. It's a passion. It's really a passion that people want to build businesses and help each other out. I don't care. And everybody is important in the world. I don't care whether somebody is washing dishes or what their job is. Their job is just as important as anybody else's. And when you're in the military, that jet fighter ain't going to go without that JP4 fuel. And if the guy didn't have the dishes washed and he gets Montezuma's revenge, it's tough to fly a fighter. And if he doesn't have his radar and his weapons don't work. So every single person is just as important as the next. They're either here to benefit you or to give you a lesson of what you shouldn't be doing. So everybody's important. We got to treat them like they're important.
That's a beautiful way to look at the world.
So I'm sorry I didn't give you a chance to talk.
No, it's not. It's not
the hidden gem in Cleveland.
It's your story.
We have a waterfall in Slavic Village that's the highest in the county. We have a 42-foot waterfall, and if the powers that be, it's twice the size of the Chagrin Falls one, and it's right on Broadway.
That? Right in Slavic Village.
It's called Mill Creek Falls, and the Metro Park spent $2 million building walkways and stuff. It's freaking crazy great. Our Metro Parks. That green necklace that we have is unfreaking believable. That you can go out and within a minute be right there in nature. Nature is phenomenal. And you know what we need to do more of is, since the beginning of time, people sat around and told stories. Everybody's life has a story. Yeah. And every one of them is worth hearing. And to just sit around and break bread there's nothing better.
Yeah.
It was all Wozniak. And Woz he's real involved with FIRST Robotics. I've been with them for 16 years. I'm one of the judges for FIRST. And if you ever want to be inspired about the future, you think of what the kids are like around the country, and you think these kids are just got their nose set in the middle. Their face is stuck in an iPhone or Android or whatever they're playing with. But when you deal with them in FIRST Robotics and you see the creativity of what they do, they build. Everyone should just look up FIRST. I'm not even going to tell what it's about. I'm going to make everyone go to FIRST, FIRST, robotics. Look and see what these games are about and what these kids build in 6 weeks. It's insanity. It's the future of our world. And I work with the inner city kids, and I got to tell you, 5% or 3% are total bozos. The rest are just kids trying to make it by. They have some difficult backgrounds. I like to feel that I've got a really crappy background. You only heard part of it. Anyway, any other thoughts? Any questions, Jeff? I've not. You haven't asked any questions.
I know.
You told me you were going to take the job of Johnny Carson, or what's his name that's on TV now.
I don't know that I've needed to ask any questions. I could imagine that you are able to kind of speak to all the things that you see in the world that are done because it's the way they've always been done, and have a perspective
it's every day I look at stuff and I go, what in the hell were they thinking? And it's everywhere. I mean, it's literally everywhere. And it comes from people doing what's always been done. It's like when they stop a car, they either have brake shoes or disc pads. So you're telling me the very first people ever built cars were that damn smart that here we are, decades later, still stopping them in the same damn way. Or let's say if you didn't have rubber, how would you you got to imagine whatever you're leaning on for your technology, imagine to yourself, what if we didn't have that technology? How could we accomplish the same thing? And that's when you end up with things that's beyond what you're doing now. Because any technology gets better and better and better till it reaches like a brick wall. Then it can't get any better. Makes sense? But then you stand back and you look at it like right now, in a good example, a lot of the stuff that we're relying on because of supply, we can't get. So you're going to very quickly find that we're going to find better ways, and some of them will end up being better than what we've been doing because this is the way we've always built this. And when you do it a different way, you might find out it's actually a better way of doing it.
Yeah, it's just unfortunate that sometimes it takes the catalyst of something truly catastrophic to give you that deliberate pause. Well, I mean, Dennis, this was an enlightening conversation. I think we could probably talk for many more hours, but
oh yeah, but it's reaching that. You said hour and a half, so I'm still got 6 minutes. We got to beat the other guys.
Well, I'll ask you a closing question then, because I am curious. When you think about all of the problems that you observe in the world, why is it that you chose to focus on this audible literacy and communication I imagine you really could have tackled any variety of problems?
I'll give you my take on business. Is that okay? As a final word?
Sure.
I will present to you that trains are in the same business as McDonald's. Do you know what that business is? And everybody always goes, they're in a real estate business because they watched the movie. Do you know what McDonald's real business is and what made them explode? They shift time. When you go to McDonald's, you could grab a Big Mac and be on the turnpike, and you've just saved yourself a half an hour to an hour of time that day. So all the fast foods, what they're really selling is time shifting. When they did the drive-thrus, it's 86% of their business. And in COVID, the Wendy's, McDonald's, and all those places have never done better business. In fact, the rallies and places like that, and there's McDonald's that still aren't open up inside because they realized they're making better money by just the drive-thru. And they're really in the time shifting business. That's how come Blockbusters is gone and Netflix. It's the time of picking up that DVD and taking it back. So anything that shifts time is valuable. If you've got a CAT scanner that can do a slice, 3 slices a second versus one that does 1 a second, even if the images are exactly the same, you don't think it's that much faster. But over a year, that's a lot of patience.
But it's interesting because as much as those are saving time, I feel like in a lot of ways the businesses of today are in competition just with other things that you do, just in your time, right? Like Netflix is in competition with sleep, with your physical activity, with your work, right? It's as much as they're saving time, they're trying to absorb your time.
That's their job, is to absorb your time. So anything that shifts time, if you've got an NC machine that can crank out parts twice as fast as another and it's 50% more expensive, it's cheaper, right? If you're punching out, so you're really paying for time is a valuable thing, because in reality, all of us are finite creatures. So in the back of your brain, you know that if, say, you were to live forever, you could never, ever die, nobody would ever be in a big rush because it wouldn't matter. It wouldn't matter. So anything that shifts time is very valuable because the most expensive thing that exists is time. Steve Jobs couldn't have bought one more minute of his life for $1 billion. All you have is time, and it's limited. And anything that affects your senses, anything that goes in your eyes, your nose, your ears, your mouth, and gets converted to dopamine and endorphins, that's sex, drugs, rock and roll. And anything that, why would you go and pay good money for a meal or go to a concert or listen to music in an elevator, as bad as it is? But anything that affects our senses, because we seek out things. They always talk about this business thing. If I hear one more time, they say, what's the pain point? Do they miss all the pleasure point? You don't get comfortable seats because of pain. You get comfort. You'll seek comfort. You'll seek good things. You'll run away from pain. So do you want to only sell because of the pain point, or do you want to have things where it's a pleasure point and people feel good about what you've got? People love music. Why would they sell all those CDs or streaming or all this? Because we're wired for sound. We're wired, and it makes dopamine and endorphins. When you eat a good meal, you go, damn, that pizza was rocking, right? So anything that affects your senses, anything that affects time shifting, and anything that affects ego and pride. Why do you wear the Rolex watch? Gives the same time as my Mickey Mouse Apple Watch. Why do you drive the Porsche? Because Porsche gives you the thrill of the speed, saves time, and ego, all rolled into one little piece. And people will trade one for another. You'll go to Cedar Point and wait a half an hour for that damn demon drop, and you trade time for that thrill. So I present that most things in life are going to affect your senses, shift time, or affect ego. That covers a lot of things when you really peel away what things are about. Not 100%. But a lot of things, if it's shifting time, we hang our speakers and 2 screws and they're hung. Everybody else is there for days, renting scissors lifts and stuff. The highest they ever go is 10 feet off the ground in a gym. You could do that from a step ladder. Well, Jeff, we've got to meet. You got to come by and visit my lab because you're going to be astounded when you see.
I would love
a cool
that
place. Oh wait, I could actually zoom out and see some of this stuff here.
Oh my God!
So. If you look at this place,
I have to try and describe what just happened for everyone listening, which was for the entirety of our conversation for the last hour and a half. It was like a normal Zoom where you see someone and they're right on the other side of the screen. And what Dennis just did is he zoomed out, and this entire conversation, he was maybe like 4 tables away. Incredible.
We got all the toys here. We got more toys than Carter's got liver papers. Actually, when I do Zoom, we got a 100-inch screen to watch the main speaker. So this is what our place looks like.
Wow.
It's a lot of cool stuff.
It is very cool for those without the visual aid. Well, Dennis, if folks have anything they would want to follow up with you about philosophically, audio, or otherwise, what is the best way for them to do so?
My email, and my name's always upside down on my emails, which I don't know if you've seen it yet. But anyway, Althar, Althar, audio, AUDIO, @gmail.com. Althar Audio Gmail. And altharaudio.com is the website, altharaudio.com. Jeffrey, you got to come here and break bread. We'll have a great time. You got to see a movie in our theater. We've only got 6,000 DVDs and a few thousand lasers. So, but it's full Atmos. It's got the whole spiel.
I look forward to it.
Pretty good.
Yeah. Well, Dennis, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
God bless, Jeff.
That's all for this week. Thank you for listening. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's show. So if you have any feedback, please send over an email to jeffrey@layoftheland.fm or find us on Twitter @podlayoftheland or @sternjefe, JEFE. If you or someone you know would make a good guest for our show, please reach out as well and let us know. And if you enjoy the podcast, please subscribe and leave a review on iTunes or on your preferred podcast player. Your support goes a long way to help us spread the word and continue to bring the Cleveland founders and builders we love having on the show. We'll be back here next week at the same time to map more of the land. The Lay of the Land podcast was developed in collaboration with The Up Company, LLC. At the time of this recording, unless otherwise indicated, we do not own equity or other financial interests in the company which appear on this show. All opinions expressed by podcast participants are solely their own and do not reflect the opinions of any entity which employs us. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.